The bitter wind howled through the narrow canyon, slicing through Francesca Grayson's threadbare coat as she stumbled forward, her fingers numb and her tears freezing on her cheeks. The men who had promised to escort her safely to Denver had abandoned her here at Willow Creek, taking her money, her horse, and leaving her to die in the ruthless February blizzard of 1879. Liars, thieves. She cried into the storm, her voice lost in the howling wind as she struggled forward through knee-deep snow. The frozen creek to her right gurgled ominously beneath a thin sheet of treacherous ice. Francesca had left her home in Boston with dreams of becoming a schoolteacher in one of the booming Colorado mining towns. At 22, she had been determined to make her own way after her parents' death left her with few options beyond marrying her father's business associate, a man 30 years her senior with wandering hands and cruel eyes, her strength failing. She misjudged her step on the slippery creek bank. With a terrified cry, she plunged through the ice, the shocking cold stealing her breath as the current pulled her beneath the surface. The last thing she remembered was the brilliant white of the snow against the darkening sky as consciousness slipped away. Riley McAllister had been tracking the group of men for 3 days. As one of the most respected ranchers in the territory and an occasional deputy when Sheriff Wilson needed help, he'd been asked to investigate reports of swindlers targeting travelers headed to Denver. He hadn't expected to find anything in this weather, but the fresh tracks in the snow had given him hope. His buckskin, Thunder, snorted uneasily as they picked their way along the creek. Riley patted the horse's neck reassuringly. "Easy there, boy. Something's got you spooked." That's when he saw a flash of dark fabric against the white snow and ice. Dismounting quickly, Riley approached the creek's edge, his heart hammering when he realized it was a woman, half submerged in the freezing water, her dark hair fanned out around her pale face. "Damn it all," he swore, immediately wading into the frigid water. The cold bit through his boots and heavy wool pants, but he pushed forward, gathering the unconscious woman into his arms. She was so pale, her lips blue, that for a terrible moment he feared he was too late. But as he carried her to the bank, he felt the faintest breath against his cheek. She was alive, but barely. "Hold on, miss," he murmured, stripping off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapping it around her drenched form. "I'm not letting you die out here." With practiced movements, Riley secured her to Thunder, then mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest to share what warmth he could. His cabin was less than 2 miles away, but in this weather, it might as well have been 20. Still, he urged Thunder forward, knowing every minute counted. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder as they rode, her breathing shallow. Riley found himself talking to her, though she couldn't hear him. "You're going to be all right. My cabin's not far. Got a good fire going before I left. We'll get you warmed up in no time." He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. The small log cabin appeared through the swirling snow just as Thunder was beginning to falter. Riley had never been so grateful to see his humble home. He dismounted quickly, lifting the woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, which worried him further. Inside, the fire had burned low, but embers still glowed. Riley laid the woman on his bed, quickly adding wood to the fireplace until flames leaped up the chimney. He knew what needed to be done. Her wet clothes would kill her as surely as the creek would have. But the thought of undressing an unconscious woman made him hesitate. "Forgive me, miss," he murmured as he began carefully removing her sodden garments. He worked efficiently, his face burning despite the urgency of the situation. Once he had her wrapped in every blanket he owned, he set about preparing hot bricks to place around her. The next hours passed in anxious vigilance. Riley brewed strong coffee and sat beside the bed, occasionally checking her pulse or adding another log to the fire. Outside, the blizzard raged, but inside his cabin, he fought a different battle against time and cold. It was near midnight when she finally stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips. Riley leaned forward, relief washing over him as her eyelids fluttered open to reveal striking green eyes. "Where?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're safe," Riley answered, offering her a cup of warm broth he'd prepared hours earlier. "I found you in Willow Creek." "My name's Riley McAllister. I've got a small ranch about 15 miles outside of Aurora." She tried to sit up but fell back weakly. "Francesca," she managed. "Francesca Grayson. Miss Grayson, you need to rest. You nearly froze to death." Her eyes widened suddenly as awareness returned. "My clothes, I had to remove them," Riley admitted, his cheeks coloring. "They were soaked through, I promise I was. I was respectful. I have some spare clothes you can wear once you're stronger." Tears welled in her eyes. "They left me there, took everything." Riley's jaw tightened. "The men you were traveling with," she nodded weakly, "said they'd take me to Denver. I paid them nearly everything I had." "I know the type," he said grimly. "Been tracking a group that's been doing the same to others. Rest now, Miss Grayson. We can talk more in the morning." Francesca wanted to ask more questions, but exhaustion pulled her back into darkness. Riley watched her sleep, his mind filled with questions about this Eastern woman so far from home, and burning anger toward the men who had left her to die. Outside, the blizzard continued to howl, but Riley McAllister had never felt more certain of his purpose. He would nurse this woman back to health, and then he would find the men responsible for abandoning her. One way or another, justice would be served. The next morning, Francesca awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a knife against wood. Opening her eyes, she found Riley McAllister sitting beside the fireplace, whittling what appeared to be a small wooden horse. The rhythmic motion of his hands was strangely hypnotic. "Good morning," he said without looking up, somehow sensing she was awake. "How are you feeling?" Francesca took stock of her body. Everything ached, but the paralyzing cold was gone. "Better, I think. Thank you for saving my life, Mr. McAllister." He set aside his carving and brought her a steaming cup of coffee. "Riley, please," and anyone would have done the same. "We both know that's not true," she replied softly, accepting the cup with trembling hands. "How long was I in the creek?" "Can't say for certain." "Found you just before sundown yesterday." His eyes, a warm brown that reminded her of autumn in Massachusetts, studied her with concern. "You were lucky. Any longer and—" He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew how close she had come to death. "I've put some of my smaller clothes on the chair there," he continued, gesturing to a neatly folded pile. "They'll be too big, but they're clean and dry. I'll step outside while you dress." Francesca waited until the door closed behind him before attempting to stand. Her legs were unsteady, and the simple act of dressing exhausted her. Riley's shirt hung to her knees, and she had to roll the pants several times at the waist and ankles. Still, they were warm and smelled of cedar and pine like him. When Riley returned, he carried an armload of firewood. He added several logs to the fire before turning to look at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You look like a child playing dress-up," he observed, then immediately looked chagrined. "Forgive me, that was unkind." "It was truthful," Francesca replied, attempting a small smile of her own. "I must look a sight." "You look alive, Miss Grayson. That's what matters." She sank back onto the edge of the bed, still too weak to stand for long. "Please call me Francesca, after saving my life and—" "Well, seeing me in such a vulnerable state, formality seems unnecessary." Riley nodded, a hint of color touching his weathered cheeks. "Francesca, then." He busied himself preparing a simple breakfast of cornbread and beans. "The storm's still bad. We'll be stuck here for at least another day. Once it clears, I can take you to town to Aurora." "Aurora? But I need to get to Denver." "Denver's still a hard ride from here, especially in winter. Aurora's growing fast might be work for you there." "What were you hoping to find in Denver?" Francesca accepted the plate he offered. "I trained as a teacher in Boston. There was an advertisement for educators needed in Colorado territory." Riley frowned. "Those men who left you, they were supposed to escort you to a teaching position." "Yes, Mr. Blackwell arranged everything. He seemed so genuine." "Blackwell," Riley repeated, his expression darkening. "Tall fellow, scar above his right eye." Francesca nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "Know of him. He and his gang have been working this territory for months. They promise safe passage, take people's money, then leave them stranded or worse." His hands tightened around his coffee cup. "You're not the first, but if I have anything to say about it, you'll be the last." "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been deputized to bring them in. Once this storm breaks and you're safely in Aurora, I'm going after them." The thought of Riley confronting the men who had abandoned her filled Francesca with dread. "That's too dangerous. They were armed and there were 4 of them." A slow smile spread across Riley's face, transforming his serious features. "I appreciate your concern, but this isn't my first hunt, Francesca. Besides, these men need to answer for what they've done." She wanted to argue further, but exhaustion overtook her again. Riley noticed immediately and took her plate. "You need more rest. Your body's been through a terrible ordeal." As he helped her back under the blankets, his hand accidentally brushed against hers. The simple touch sent an unexpected warmth through Francesca that had nothing to do with the roaring fire. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly aware of how close he stood, of the strength in his gentle hands, of the kindness in his eyes. "Sleep well, Francesca," he replied softly, and she thought she felt the lightest touch against her forehead before she drifted off, or perhaps she had already begun to dream. 3 days passed before the blizzard finally relented. During that time, Francesca regained her strength, and Riley proved himself to be an attentive caretaker and surprisingly good cook. Their conversations ranged from her life in Boston to his experiences on the frontier. She learned that he had come west after the war, seeking a fresh start after witnessing too much death. He'd worked cattle drives, tried his hand at mining, and eventually saved enough to buy his small ranch. He lived alone but spoke fondly of friends in Aurora and seemed to have the respect of his neighbors. What he didn't say, but what Francesca could see, was how the solitude weighed on him. His cabin was meticulously maintained but lacking in personal touches. The only decoration was a small framed drawing of what she assumed was his family parents and 2 younger sisters. He'd explained when she asked. On the morning the sun finally broke through the clouds, Riley announced it was time to head for Aurora. "The trail will be difficult, but Thunder can manage. We should reach town by nightfall." Francesca nodded, trying to hide her reluctance. These few days in Riley's cabin had given her time to think, to consider her options. The teaching position in Denver, if it had ever existed, was surely filled by now. She had almost no money left, and winter was far from over. "I've been thinking," Riley said as he helped her don his spare coat, the sleeves rolled up several times to accommodate her smaller frame. "Aurora's schoolteacher, Mrs. Whitfield, has been talking about retiring. She's well past 60 and the winter journey is hard on her bones. You might speak with her about taking over." Francesca looked up in surprise. "You think she would consider me? I'm a stranger here." Riley's smile was warm. "A Boston-educated teacher. She'd be delighted. Besides, you wouldn't be a stranger for long. Aurora's small but welcoming. The journey to Aurora was as challenging as Riley had predicted. The trail was treacherous with ice and snow, but Thunder proved to be as sure-footed as his master had claimed. Riley insisted that Francesca sit in front of him, where he could keep her secure in the saddle and shield her from the worst of the wind. Pressed against his chest, his arms around her as he guided Thunder through the difficult terrain, Francesca found herself acutely aware of him in a way that both comforted and confused her. She had come west to escape an unwanted marriage and find independence, not to develop feelings for the first kind man she encountered. And yet, there was something about Riley McAllister that spoke to her soul, his quiet strength, his unassuming kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. He had saved her life, yes, but it was more than gratitude she felt when their eyes met. As the sun began its descent, the scattered buildings of Aurora came into view. It was smaller than Francesca had expected, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a tall steeple, and houses scattered along the perimeter. Smoke rose from chimneys, and despite the bitter cold, a few people moved about on necessary errands. "It's not much compared to Boston," Riley said, a hint of apology in his voice. "It's perfect," Francesca replied, and meant it. After days in the wilderness, the small town looked like civilization indeed. Riley guided Thunder to a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Aurora Hotel and Restaurant. As they dismounted, the door opened to reveal a stout woman with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Riley McAllister. "We'd about given you up for lost in that blizzard," she called, her stern expression melting into relief. Her gaze shifted to Francesca, curiosity evident. "And who might this be?" "Mrs. Holloway. This is Miss Francesca Grayson. She was set upon by Blackwell's gang and left to die at Willow Creek. I was fortunate enough to find her before the worst happened." Mrs. Holloway's hand flew to her chest. "Good heavens! You poor dear! Come in at once. You must be half frozen and starving." The interior of the hotel was surprisingly cozy, with a large fireplace dominating the main room and several tables set for dinner. The smell of stew and fresh bread made Francesca's stomach rumble. "Martha," Riley addressed Mrs. Holloway, "Miss Grayson is a trained teacher from Boston. I thought perhaps she might speak with Mrs. Whitfield about possibly taking over the school." Mrs. Holloway brightened. "Is that so? Emma's been praying for a replacement since that fall she took last month. Her hip's never been the same." She turned to Francesca. "You'd be a blessing, Miss Grayson. Our children need education, but most families can't afford to send them east for schooling." "I would be honored to meet with Mrs. Whitfield," Francesca replied, warming to the idea more by the minute. "Though I have almost no possessions or money. Those men took everything." "Nonsense, Mrs. Holloway declared. "The town provides room and board for the teacher, and as for clothes and such, we'll manage. Aurora takes care of its own." She gave Francesca an appraising look. "You're about my daughter's size. She left some things behind when she married and moved to Denver. They're yours if you want them." Overwhelmed by this generosity, Francesca could only nod in gratitude. Riley cleared his throat. "I need to speak with Sheriff Wilson. Will you see that Miss Grayson gets a hot meal and a room for the night?" "Of course," Mrs. Holloway assured him. "Though you look like you could use a meal yourself, Riley." "I'll be back shortly," he promised, his eyes meeting Francesca's. "Rest well." After Riley departed, Mrs. Holloway showed Francesca to a small but clean room on the second floor, the washrooms at the end of the hall. "I'll bring up hot water and some of Lizzie's clothes. Dinner's at 6, but I'll have a tray sent up if you're too tired to come down." Left alone, Francesca sank onto the edge of the bed, emotion finally overwhelming her. She had nearly died. She had been rescued by a kind stranger. She might have found a place for herself in this remote town. The tears came then, a release of fear and gratitude and exhaustion. When Mrs. Holloway returned with the promised hot water and clothing, she tactfully ignored Francesca's red-rimmed eyes. "That Riley's a good man," she commented as she laid out a simple but well-made blue dress. "Never known him to turn away from someone in need, but I've also never seen him bring a young woman to town before. Caused quite a stir when you rode in together." Francesca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He saved my life. I owe him everything." Mrs. Holloway smiled knowingly. "Owe him, is it? Well, life has a way of evening accounts in the end. Clean up and rest, dear. There'll be plenty of time for sorting out debts of gratitude." After washing away the grime of the journey and changing into the borrowed dress, which fit reasonably well, Francesca felt human again. She decided to go downstairs rather than eat alone in her room. The main room had filled with diners, and she hesitated in the doorway, suddenly self-conscious. "Miss Grayson," a familiar voice called. Riley stood from a table near the fire, waving her over. He was accompanied by an older man wearing a sheriff's badge. "Come join us." As she crossed the room, Francesca was keenly aware of the curious glances from the other patrons. Riley pulled out a chair for her, his usual reserve softened by a warm smile. "Sheriff Wilson, this is Miss Francesca Grayson." "Francesca, Sheriff Thomas Wilson." The sheriff, a weathered man with kind eyes, nodded respectfully. "Miss Grayson, Riley's been telling me about your ordeal. I'm mighty sorry for what you endured, but glad he found you when he did." "As am I, Sheriff," she replied. "Mr. McAllister mentioned you've been looking for these men for some time." "That's right. They've swindled at least 6 travelers that we know of. Yours is the worst case yet, though. Leaving a woman alone in that blizzard." His expression hardened. "That's attempted murder in my book." Riley leaned forward, his voice low. "I'm heading out at first light, Tom. Their trail will be cold, but I know their patterns. They'll have headed for the Denver road, looking for more victims." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I'd go with you, but with Jenkins down with that broken leg, I'm the only law in town. Take what supplies you need." Francesca's heart sank. She had known Riley intended to pursue the men, but the reality of him leaving so soon and facing such danger hit her harder than expected. "Must you go tomorrow?" she asked, then immediately regretted the question when both men looked at her in surprise. Riley's expression softened. "The sooner I leave, the better chance I have of finding them. Besides, you'll be in good hands here. Mrs. Holloway said she's arranged for you to meet Mrs. Whitfield tomorrow morning." "Yes, of course," Francesca replied, embarrassed by her outburst. Please be careful." "Always am," Riley assured her, though the sheriff's skeptical snort suggested otherwise. Dinner passed pleasantly enough, with Sheriff Wilson sharing stories about Aurora and its inhabitants. Francesca learned that the town had been founded just 15 years earlier, after gold was discovered in Cherry Creek. Though the gold hadn't lasted, the town had persevered, becoming a hub for ranchers and farmers in the region. After the meal, Riley walked Francesca to the foot of the stairs. Away from the sheriff's watchful eye, an awkward silence fell between them. "I wanted to thank you again," Francesca finally said. "Not just for saving my life, but for everything since. You've been extraordinarily kind to a complete stranger." Riley shook his head. "You're no stranger, Francesca." "Not anymore." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I want you to have this, for luck." He pressed something into her palm, the small wooden horse he had been carving in the cabin. Francesca ran her fingers over the smooth surface, touched beyond words by the simple gift. "It's beautiful." "Thank you. I'll be back in a week or so," Riley said, his voice gruff. Sooner if I can. I'll be here, she promised, and in that moment she knew it was true. Whatever her original plans had been, her path now led through Aurora. As he turned to leave, Francesca impulsively caught his hand. Riley. His name on her lips felt right somehow. Be safe. His fingers tightened around hers briefly. I will. Good night, Francesca. She watched him walk away, the wooden horse clutched tightly in her hand, and wondered why his departure felt so much like losing something precious she'd only just found. The following morning, Francesca met Emma Whitfield, the elderly school teacher of Aurora. Despite her obvious physical frailty, Mrs. Whitfield's mind was sharp, and her questions about Francesca's education and teaching philosophy were incisive. I've taught these children for 15 years, she explained as she showed Francesca the small schoolhouse. Some of my first pupils now have children of their own in my classroom. They deserve the best education we can provide, even out here. I couldn't agree more, Francesca replied earnestly. Every child deserves the opportunity to learn, regardless of where they live. Mrs. Whitfield nodded approvingly. Mrs. Holloway speaks highly of you, and if Riley McAllister vouches for your character, that's good enough for me. The position is yours if you want it, starting after the spring thaw. Until then, I'd appreciate your assistance. These old bones don't move like they used to. And just like that, Francesca found herself with a purpose and a place in Aurora. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as she assisted Mrs. Whitfield with lessons, met the townspeople, and began to learn the rhythms of life in a frontier town. The people of Aurora proved to be as generous as Mrs. Holloway had suggested. Various residents appeared at the hotel with offerings: a warm shawl from the dressmaker, sturdy boots from the cobbler, books from the minister's wife. By the end of the week, Francesca had accumulated enough possessions to feel almost settled. But despite the warm welcome and her growing connection to the town, her thoughts constantly returned to Riley. Each day, she found herself watching the road from Denver, hoping for his return. Each night, she held the small wooden horse and prayed for his safety. 10 days after Riley's departure, a late winter storm descended on Aurora, bringing howling winds and fresh snow. Francesca couldn't help but remember her own terrifying experience in the blizzard and wonder if Riley was caught in similar conditions. She was helping Mrs. Holloway prepare dinner when the hotel door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and a figure so covered in ice and snow they were barely recognizable. "Riley," Mrs. Holloway gasped, rushing forward. Francesca's heart leaped at the name, but as Mrs. Holloway helped the figure remove their snow-covered coat, she saw it wasn't Riley but a young man she didn't recognize. "Peter Jenkins," Mrs. Holloway explained, seeing Francesca's confusion. "The sheriff's deputy. What's happened, Peter? You shouldn't be riding with that broken leg." "Had to, Mrs. Holloway," he panted, his face pale with pain and cold. "Got a telegram from Denver. Riley's been shot." The words hit Francesca like a physical blow. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Is he?" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "He's alive," Peter assured her quickly, "but badly wounded. He's at the doctor's office in Denver. Sheriff's gone to bring him home, but with this storm." "We have to help them," Francesca declared, already moving toward the door. "We can't leave Riley alone in Denver." Mrs. Holloway caught her arm. "Child, you can't go out in this. The road to Denver would be suicide in this weather." "I survived a blizzard at Willow Creek," Francesca countered. "I can survive the road to Denver." "And nearly died doing it," Mrs. Holloway reminded her firmly. "Besides, Sheriff Wilson is already on his way. The best thing you can do for Riley now is stay safe and help me prepare for his return. We'll need clean bandages, broth, and medicines. Recognizing the wisdom in Mrs. Holloway's words, Francesca reluctantly agreed. The next 2 days were the longest of her life as they waited for news. The storm finally broke on the 3rd day, and by mid-afternoon, the distant sound of horses announced arrivals. Francesca ran outside, heedless of the cold, her heart in her throat as Sheriff Wilson's wagon came into view. Riley lay in the back, bundled in blankets, his face pale and drawn with pain. But his eyes were open, and when he saw Francesca standing in the snow, a ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Didn't expect a welcoming committee," he rasped as the sheriff and 2 other men carefully lifted him from the wagon. "What happened?" Francesca asked, falling into step beside the makeshift stretcher as they carried Riley into the hotel. "Caught up to Blackwell and his gang outside Denver," Riley explained weakly. "There was a gunfight. Got 2 of them, but Blackwell put a bullet in me before Sheriff Harrison's men arrived. Harrison caught Blackwell and his remaining man trying to flee Denver," Sheriff Wilson added. "They're in custody now. Won't be abandoning any more travelers." They brought Riley to a room on the ground floor of the hotel where Dr. Peterson, Aurora's elderly physician, was waiting. After examining Riley's wound, a bullet hole in his left shoulder that had become infected, the doctor prescribed rest, clean bandages, and a regimen of willow bark tea for the fever. "He's young and strong," Dr. Peterson told Francesca privately. The Denver doctor did good work getting the bullet out clean. With proper care, he should recover fully. "I'll see to it," Francesca promised, already rolling up her sleeves. Over the next week, Francesca split her time between helping Mrs. Whitfield with the school and caring for Riley. His fever spiked dangerously twice, leaving him delirious and calling out names she didn't recognize. During these episodes, she bathed his forehead with cool cloths and spoke soothingly, reciting poetry and stories to anchor him to the world of the living. During his lucid periods, they talked more freely than they had before. Perhaps it was his weakened state, or perhaps the near brush with death, but Riley spoke of things he had previously kept private, the nightmares from the war that sometimes woke him screaming, his dream of expanding his small ranch into something that could support a family, his fear of ending up alone like his father. In turn, Francesca shared her own fears and hopes, her grief over her parents' deaths, her determination to be more than someone's wife, her growing love for Aurora and its people. What remained unspoken, hovering in the air between them, were the feelings that had begun in a snowbound cabin and grown stronger with each passing day. 2 weeks after his return to Aurora, Riley was strong enough to sit up in a chair by the window. The spring thaw had begun, turning the snow-covered streets into muddy thoroughfares, but bringing with it the promise of renewal. "Mrs. Whitfield tells me you've been a godsend in the schoolroom," Riley commented as Francesca brought him a fresh cup of tea. "The children are wonderful," she replied, smiling. "So eager to learn, despite having fewer resources than my students in Boston." "And you? Are you happy here, Francesca?" The question caught her off guard, not because of its content but because of the intensity with which Riley asked it. "Yes," she answered honestly. "More than I expected to be." Riley nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot these past weeks about life and death, about chances not taken." "What chances?" Francesca asked, her heart beating faster. "When I was lying in that doctor's office in Denver, not sure if I'd make it through the night, I had only one regret." His eyes, warm and direct, met hers. "That I might die without telling you how I feel." The room seemed to grow very still, the sounds of the busy hotel fading away until there was only this moment, this man, these unspoken words hanging between them. "And how do you feel, Riley?" Francesca asked, barely above a whisper. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I've fallen in love with you, Francesca Grayson. I know it's fast. I know you came west for independence, not to tie yourself to a rancher with little to offer. But I had to tell you," even if Francesca silenced him by pressing her fingers against his lips. "You have everything to offer, Riley McAllister. You gave me my life, a new home, a future. And somewhere between pulling me from that creek and now, you've given me your heart as well." Her voice trembled slightly. "A heart I've come to cherish more than I can say." The smile that spread across Riley's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss against her palm. "Does that mean—" "It means I love you too," Francesca confirmed, her cheeks flushing with the boldness of the declaration. "Though I never expected to find love in a frozen creek." Riley laughed, the sound warming her more thoroughly than any fire. "Nor I, but I'm thankful every day that I followed those tracks in the snow." Their first kiss, when it came, was gentle and questioning, mindful of Riley's healing wound. But beneath the gentleness was a current of passion and promise that left them both breathless. "What happens now?" Francesca asked, her forehead resting against his. "Now," Riley smiled. "Now I get back on my feet. I finish building that second room on my cabin, been meaning to do it for years. I speak to Mrs. Whitfield about the distance between the ranch and the school." His eyes twinkled with mischief. "And I see about making an honest woman of you, Francesca Grayson, if you'll have me." "Is that a proposal, Deputy McAllister?" she teased, though her heart was soaring. "Consider it notice of intent, Miss Grayson. The proper proposal will involve a ring and considerably less bandages." As spring fully arrived in Aurora, Riley regained his strength, and Francesca settled into her role as teacher. True to his word, Riley added a second room to his cabin, and with the help of neighbors, constructed a small stable and expanded the vegetable garden. Their courtship proceeded under the watchful and largely approving eyes of the town. There were a few raised eyebrows at the speed of their attachment, but most agreed that surviving a blizzard together and a gunshot wound tended to accelerate matters of the heart. In late April, when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows surrounding Aurora, Riley took Francesca riding to his favorite spot, a high bluff overlooking the valley, with the snow-capped Rockies rising majestically in the distance. "I used to come here to think," he explained as he spread a blanket for their picnic. "When I first bought the land, I'd ride up here and try to imagine what it could become." "And what did you imagine?" Francesca asked, accepting the hand he offered to help her sit. "A home. A real one, not just a place to sleep." He looked out over the valley to where his small cabin stood near a cluster of cottonwoods. "I imagined children playing in that meadow, a woman's touch to soften the rough edges." He turned back to her, his expression suddenly serious. "I imagined you, Francesca, long before I knew you existed." From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box carved with the same care as the horse he'd given her. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," Riley explained. "My father gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found the woman who made me want to be a better man." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Francesca Grayson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Francesca's vision as she nodded, too overcome to speak immediately. When she found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Yes, Riley. Yes, I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Francesca marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from the drawing rooms of Boston to the wilds of Colorado, from the depths of a frozen creek to the heights of unexpected love. They were married in June, with the entire town of Aurora in attendance. The schoolhouse had been transformed with wildflowers and ribbons, and Mrs. Whitfield, standing straighter than she had in years, proudly gave a reading on the nature of love and partnership. Sheriff Wilson stood as Riley's best man, while Mrs. Holloway, who had become something of a surrogate mother to Francesca, helped her prepare for the ceremony. The dress, ivory silk with delicate lace trim, had been a gift from the women of Aurora, each contributing what they could to ensure the town's teacher and the deputy had a proper wedding. As they spoke their vows beneath the summer sky, Francesca thought of all the twists of fate that had led to this moment: the advertisement for teachers in Colorado, the swindlers who had abandoned her, the blizzard that had nearly taken her life, the cowboy who had saved her and stolen her heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Riley's kiss was a promise of all the days to come, of a love forged in ice and tempered by fire. The years that followed were not without challenges. The harsh Colorado winters tested even the most established homesteads. There were droughts that threatened the cattle and heavy snows that isolated them for weeks. Riley occasionally still rode as deputy when Sheriff Wilson needed him, each departure causing Francesca a flutter of anxiety until his safe return. But there were joys too, abundant and unexpected. The small school flourished under Francesca's care, with children from neighboring ranches riding miles each day for lessons. Riley's ranch expanded gradually, his careful stewardship of the land and breeding of horses bringing a modest prosperity. Their greatest joy arrived just over a year after their wedding, a son they named Thomas, after Sheriff Wilson, who had become like family to them. 2 years later came Michael, as sturdy and calm as his father. And finally, 3 years after that, a daughter, Eleanor, with her mother's green eyes and determined spirit. On the 5th anniversary of the day Riley had pulled Francesca from Willow Creek, they stood together on the porch of their now expanded home. The children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the crisp February air. The ranch had grown to include a proper barn, a bunkhouse for the 2 hired hands who helped with the horses, and a large garden that supplied vegetables year-round. "You ever think about it?" Riley asked, his arm around Francesca's waist. "How different things might have been if I hadn't decided to track those men that day." Francesca leaned against him, savoring his warmth and strength. "I try not to. The thought of never finding you, never having this life." She shook her head. "It's too painful to consider." Riley pressed a kiss to her temple. "I used to think finding you was luck. Now I know better." "What was it then?" "Destiny," he said simply. "Some things are just meant to be, Francesca. You and me, this family, this life we've built, it was always waiting for us, even in that frozen creek." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Francesca McAllister offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the storm that had nearly taken her life, but had instead given her everything she'd never known she wanted. In the warmth of her husband's embrace, with their children's laughter in her ears and the future stretching bright before them, she knew that Riley was right. Some things were simply meant to be, and their love, born in ice and nurtured through hardship and joy alike, was the greatest destiny of all. 10 years after Francesca had been pulled from the frozen creek, Aurora had grown into a proper town. The railroad had arrived, bringing with it new settlers, businesses, and opportunities. The McAllister Ranch had flourished as well, becoming known throughout the territory for its fine horses and cattle. Francesca had long since handed over the main teaching duties to a younger woman, though she still held special classes for advanced students 3 afternoons a week. Her true passion now was the small library she had established in a corner of the expanded schoolhouse. filled with books donated by Eastern publishers and well-to-do former students. Riley had retired as deputy when Thomas turned 5, deciding that raising his family and managing the ranch were adventure enough. His reputation as a fair and honest man had only grown over the years, and he often found himself mediating disputes between neighbors or advising newcomers on the challenges of frontier life. On a warm September morning, as Francesca sat on the porch mending one of Michael's perpetually torn shirts, a rider approached their home. Shading her eyes against the sun, she recognized Sheriff Wilson, now gray-haired but still straight-backed in the saddle. "Thomas." She called to her eldest, who was practicing his roping skills nearby. "Go fetch your father from the south pasture. The sheriff's coming." As Thomas raced off on his pony, Francesca went to greet their visitor. "Sheriff Wilson, what a pleasant surprise. Will you stay for lunch?" The sheriff dismounted, his expression somber. "Francesca, I wish this was a social call, but I'm afraid I've got news Riley needs to hear." Before she could question him further, Riley and Thomas returned, Riley's face creased with concern at the unexpected visit. "Tom, what brings you out this way?" The sheriff removed his hat. "Just got a telegram from the Denver prison. Blackwell escaped 3 days ago." The name hit Francesca like a physical blow. After all these years, she had almost managed to forget the man who had abandoned her to die, who had later shot Riley and nearly killed him. "Any idea where he's headed?" Riley asked, his voice hard. "Denver authorities think he's making for the border, but—" Sheriff Wilson hesitated. "He was heard making threats before he escaped, threats against the man who put him away." "Me," Riley said flatly. "And by extension, your family," the sheriff confirmed. "I'm not saying he'll come this way. It would be foolish with every lawman between here and Mexico looking for him. But I thought you should know." "We appreciate the warning, Tom." Riley's arm went protectively around Francesca. "We'll keep our eyes open." After the sheriff departed, promising to send word if Blackwell was captured, Riley gathered the children and explained in simple terms that a bad man might be in the area, and they were to stay close to the house for a few days. That night, after the children were asleep, Francesca found Riley cleaning his old Henry rifle at the kitchen table. "You really think he'll come here?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Riley looked up, his eyes softening at her worried expression. "No. Blackwell's a coward at heart. He'll run for Mexico." He set aside the rifle to take her hands. "But I'll be ready if he's fool enough to try." For 3 tense days, the McAllisters maintained their vigilance. Riley stationed one of the ranch hands at the road leading to their property, and Francesca kept the children close, turning their confinement to the house and yard into a series of special lessons and games. On the 4th day, a telegram arrived from Denver. Blackwell had been spotted crossing into New Mexico territory. The collective relief was palpable, and life began to return to normal at the McAllister Ranch. A week later, Riley announced at breakfast that he needed to ride to a neighboring ranch to look at a bull he was considering purchasing. "I should be back by supper," he told Francesca, kissing her cheek. "Don't wait if I'm late, though. Johnson tends to talk a man's ear off once he gets started." As the day progressed, Francesca found herself growing increasingly uneasy. The sky darkened with approaching storm clouds, and by mid-afternoon, a steady rain was falling. When supper time came with no sign of Riley, she served the children, assuring them that their father was simply waiting out the storm at the Johnson Ranch. By the time she tucked the children into bed, her unease had grown into genuine worry. Riley was an experienced horseman who knew the territory intimately. Even in poor weather, he should have returned or sent word. Just as she was considering waking Thomas to ride to the nearest neighbor for help, She heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded her as she rushed to the door, expecting to see Riley, perhaps soaked and grumbling about the weather. Instead, she found herself staring at a nightmare from the past. Ezra Blackwell sat on a mud-splattered horse, his face older and more haggard than she remembered, but his eyes still cold and calculating. More terrifying was what he held Riley's hat, unmistakable with its distinctive band. "Evening, Mrs. McAllister," Blackwell drawled, his voice sending ice through her veins. "Your husband sends his regards." "What have you done to him?" Francesca demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady while her mind raced. The rifle was inside, leaning against the wall just a few feet away. "Nothing permanent. Yet." Blackwell's smile was cruel. "He's cooling his heels in that old line shack about 2 miles east. Thought you and I should have a little chat first about the 5 years I spent in that hellhole because of him." "Riley was doing his job," Francesca replied, edging slightly toward the door. "You left me to die in that creek. You shot him when he came after you. Business is business, lady. Nothing personal until your husband made it so." Blackwell dismounted, keeping his eyes on her. "Now, here's how this goes. You're going to get whatever money and valuables you have in the house, and then you're going to come with me. Once we're safely away, I'll send word where to find McAllister. And if I refuse," Blackwell's hand moved to the gun at his hip, "then I go back and finish what I started 10 years ago. Your choice." Francesca's mind worked furiously. The children were asleep upstairs. If she screamed or ran for the rifle, Blackwell might start shooting. If she went with him, there was no guarantee he would spare Riley or leave the children unharmed. "I need to get my coat and the money," she said, striving for a submissive tone. "It's just inside." Blackwell nodded, but his eyes remained suspicious. "Be quick about it. And don't try anything foolish." Inside, Francesca moved swiftly to where the rifle stood. As her fingers closed around the cold metal, a floorboard creaked behind her. "Mama." Thomas stood at the foot of the stairs, his young face confused and frightened. "There's a man outside. I saw him from the window." "Thomas," she whispered urgently, "go to your room. Wake Michael and Alina, but keep them quiet. Lock the door and don't come out until I call you." "But Mama, now, Thomas." The sharpness in her voice startled him, but he obeyed, disappearing back up the stairs. Francesca grabbed the rifle and checked that it was loaded, just as Riley had taught her. Then she moved to the window beside the door, keeping out of sight. Blackwell was growing impatient, pacing in front of the house. "Mrs. McAllister, don't make me come in there." Taking a deep breath, Francesca stepped onto the porch, the rifle held steady in her hands. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property." Surprise flashed across his face, followed by amusement. Well, the school teacher's got some spine after all." His hand moved toward his gun. "Put that down before you hurt yourself." "I know how to use this," Francesca replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "My husband made sure of that. Now tell me where Riley is." Blackwell's amusement turned to anger. "You think I'm playing games?" "Drop the rifle or your husband dies." "You're going to kill him anyway," Francesca countered. "Just like you left me to die in that creek. The difference is, this time I'm not helpless." For a long moment, they stood in tense standoff, rain soaking them both as thunder rumbled in the distance. Then Blackwell made his move, drawing his pistol with practiced speed. Francesca fired. The sound of the shot echoed across the ranch, followed by a shocked silence. Blackwell stood frozen, his pistol half raised, a look of disbelief spreading across his face. Then he crumpled to the ground. Francesca lowered the rifle, her hands shaking violently now that the moment had passed. She had aimed for his shoulder, wanting only to stop him, but in the rain and darkness she couldn't be sure where the bullet had struck. Cautiously, she approached the fallen man. Blackwell was alive but badly wounded, the bullet having hit him in the chest. His breathing was labored and blood stained his shirt. "The line shack," he gasped when she knelt beside him. "He's in the line shack, tied up." "I'm going to get help," Francesca told him, though she doubted he would survive long enough for the doctor to arrive from town. Moving quickly, she secured Blackwell's gun, then ran to the barn. Within minutes, she had saddled her mare and was riding hard through the rain toward the line shack, praying that Blackwell had been telling the truth. The small structure loomed dark and silent in the storm. Dismounting and taking Blackwell's pistol with her, Francesca approached cautiously. "Riley," she called, pushing open the creaking door. "Francesca," Riley's voice, strained but alive, came from the darkness. Striking a match, she found him bound to a chair, a gash on his forehead but otherwise unharmed. The relief that flooded through her was so intense she nearly collapsed. "Blackwell," Riley began as she untied him, "is at the house," she finished. "I shot him, Riley. He's badly wounded." Riley stared at her in amazement as he rubbed circulation back into his wrists. "You shot Blackwell? He was going to kill you, take me, and who knows what would have happened to the children." Her voice broke as the enormity of what had transpired hit her. "I couldn't let that happen." Riley pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she finally allowed herself to tremble. "My brave, incredible wife," he murmured into her hair. "You saved us all." They rode back to the ranch to find one of their hands, awakened by the gunshot, standing guard over Blackwell's body. The outlaw had died moments after Francesca left. Sheriff Wilson, summoned by the ranch hand, arrived shortly before dawn. After hearing their account and examining the scene, he declared the shooting a clear case of self-defense. "You did what you had to do to protect your family, Francesca," he assured her. "No one will fault you for that." In the days that followed, the story of how Francesca McAllister had faced down and killed the notorious Ezra Blackwell spread throughout the territory. Some versions painted her as a frontier Annie Oakley, while others emphasized the desperate mother protecting her children. All agreed that the former Boston schoolteacher had proven herself to be as tough and resilient as any Colorado native. For Francesca, the reality was both simpler and more complex. She had taken a life, something she had never imagined herself capable of doing. But she had done so to save her family, and that knowledge helped her come to terms with her actions. Riley, for his part, seemed to look at her with new eyes, not just as his wife and the mother of his children, but as a woman of remarkable strength and courage. "I always knew you were special," he told her one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "From the moment I pulled you from that creek, and you fought to live despite everything. But I never realized just how extraordinary you truly are." Francesca leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm just a woman who loves her family more than anything in the world." "And that," Riley replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "is what makes you extraordinary." As the years continued to pass, the McAllister ranch prospered and their children grew. Thomas, at 18, followed in his father's footsteps, showing a natural aptitude for ranching and horse breeding. Michael, quieter and more studious, excelled in school and dreamed of attending university in the East. Eleanor, fiercely independent like her mother, divided her time between helping with the ranch and devouring every book in Francesca's library. In 1899, 20 years after Riley had pulled Francesca from the frozen creek, they hosted a celebration for their anniversary. Friends and neighbors from miles around gathered at the ranch, now one of the most successful in the county. Sheriff Wilson, retired but still spry, gave a toast to the most unlikely and most perfect match Aurora has ever seen. Later that evening, as the party wound down and guests departed, Riley took Francesca's hand and led her away from the house, toward a special place they had maintained through the years, a small garden near the creek that ran through their property. In the center stood a bench beneath a flowering tree, and beside it, protected by a small wooden structure, the carved horse Riley had given her all those years ago. 20 years, Riley mused, sitting beside her on the bench. At 50, his hair was silvered at the temples, and lines of laughter framed his eyes, but he was still the handsome cowboy who had captured her heart. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in that creek. Other times it feels like I've loved you forever. Francesca finished for him, her hand finding his. At 42, she remained beautiful, though the years had left their mark in the subtle lines around her eyes and the few strands of gray in her chestnut hair. Riley nodded, squeezing her hand. Exactly that. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in silk. I had this made for you, for today. Curious, Francesca unwrapped the gift to find a delicate gold locket. Opening it, she gasped at the miniature painting inside, a perfect rendering of Willow Creek in winter. To remind us where our story began, Riley explained, and how precious each chapter has been since. Tears welled in Francesca's eyes as she fastened the locket around her neck. It's perfect, Riley, like the life we've built together. As darkness fell and the stars emerged above them, Riley and Francesca McAllister sat hand in hand, remembering the frozen creek that had brought them together, the challenges they had overcome, and the love that had warmed them through it all. Their story, begun in ice and desperation, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of fate, courage, and the heart's remarkable capacity for love. In the years that followed, their children forged their own paths. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations, eventually marrying the daughter of a neighboring rancher and building a home of his own on McAllister land. Michael fulfilled his dream of attending university, studying law at Harvard before returning to Colorado to practice in Denver. Eleanor surprised everyone by becoming a journalist, her articles about frontier life appearing in publications as far away as New York and London. Through it all, Riley and Francesca remained the heart of the family, their love serving as the foundation upon which the next generation built their lives. The wooden horse, the pearl ring, and the gold locket became family treasures, tangible reminders of a love story that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled around the eaves of their home, they would sometimes share the tale with their grandchildren, the story of a frozen creek, a desperate rescue, and the extraordinary warmth of true love that could melt the coldest ice and sustain the heart through a lifetime of adventures.